with that, again, welcome to our webinar series. Today's topic is the Test Security Framework. And we know that the global need for workforce skills credentials is continuing to grow. However, for some medium and high-stakes summative credentials, the integrity of the assessment tool is not a complete equation for valid and reliable results. And so what this session is really intended to do is to review the efforts by the Security Subcommittee of the Workforce Skills Credential Division. And this is a new division from the Association of Test Publishers. So what this group did was develop a common framework that can be used to align expectations in those involved with workforce credentialing. And this includes the test publishers, examinees, and score users. And what it hopes to do is really make a transparent process out of understanding the different levels of security and privacy and trustworthiness that can be associated with the credential. And so the result is really ensuring that test security is added to this workforce skills equation. And as Rachel and Jennifer, our two speakers, will talk about just how important that this workforce credential really is. And so one of our asks at the end of our presentation today is to really ask you to participate in reviewing this framework and giving us feedback. And also, if you're interested in joining this Test Security Subcommittee, we'd love to have you involved. So let's go to our next slide, and I will introduce our presenters. Our first presenter is no stranger to test security, Rachel Schenig. She is the head of test security for ACT, where she leverages her legal background, background in international and testing experience to really proactively improve test security for ACT. She's led the development of a new data forensics program, which has helped to redesign ACT's test security framework, and also an industry-leading program to deter impersonation testing. Rachel's delivered many presentations, but most notably, she just delivered last year's keynote at the NCTA, the National Collegiate Testing Association Conference. She's also written a chapter in the Handbook of Test Security, and she has contributed to the recently published ATP NCTA Proctoring Best Practices, as well as she's a board member for the Association of Test Publishers. Our second presenter is Jennifer Garrett, and Jennifer is a senior test security analyst with ACT, where she conducts advising and investigatory activities for several of ACT's testing products across its education and workforce continuum. She's a person that is passionate about the impact of test security and the impact that it has on examinees, testing staff, score users, and the actual scores that are earned. And prior to joining test security, she spent several years in ACT's operations, where she provided support for the post-secondary products. Before joining ACT, she was a bilingual kindergarten teacher in Houston, Texas. So I'd like to welcome both of our presenters today, and what I'd like to do now is open it up to turn the time over to Rachel.
Thanks, Jamie. Well, we're going to go through very quickly a little bit of background related to the work that has been done around this test security framework, talk to you a little bit about the process and the next steps. But before we do that, what we'd actually like to do is hear from all of you through a poll. So our polling question is, are you seeing a growing trend in the workforce skills credentialing offerings in the United States market today? So your options are yes, no, or unsure. And Rochelle and Tristan, I think you have the the ability to see how these responses are coming in, so you can maybe let us know when we're done. But again, we're asking just to see, are you all experiencing or seeing a growing trend in the workforce skills credentialing offerings that are available in the U.S. market today?
Great, thanks, Rachel. And people are voting. We'll give you about 5 more seconds to vote. We have about 80% of the votes in. Okay, great. It looks like almost everyone has voted. I'm going to go ahead and share those results.
Wow. Okay, so vast majority of you are saying yes, you are seeing a growing trend in that. Some of you are unsure, and some of you are saying no, you're not really seeing much more. That's very interesting to me, and sort of helps me to understand a little bit about what you're seeing in the market. If we go back to the slide deck, this is an area that was absolutely of interest to the Association of Test Publishers Board of Directors, and they were seeing a growing trend in the workforce skills credentialing offerings in the marketplace, and that is why they started the newest division within ATP, which is the ATP Workforce Skills Credentialing Division. So if we go back to that slide deck, one of the things that the division has done has been to organize around some subcommittees. So the division actually kicked off in December of 2014, but that was sort of an opportunity to introduce it to the testing industry, and formal work really got started in 2015. So the division is only about not quite 2 years old yet, but it has come to leadership's attention very clearly that there is a strong growth in the credentialing space, both in the U.S. and actually internationally. And so this division was organized to really help focus efforts within the industry to ensure high quality, high caliber credentials are available to provide portable workforce skills credentials for a skilled workforce globally. So the two very active subcommittees right now are the Security and Privacy Subcommittee, we'll talk a little bit more about that, and the Initiative Outreach Task Force. There are a number of initiatives already underway, again, domestically and internationally, related to workforce skills credentialing and developing a framework to understand those. Most of those frameworks focus on the competencies being measured by the credentials being offered, but the Credential Transparency Initiative, Connecting Credentials, ONET, there's just a number of both U.S. and international activities underway in that space. One of the other divisions that is at work, and if you'll go to the next slide, we can talk about that, is the definition division. So there's a lot of debate going on right now in the industry as to really, how do we define a workforce and how do we define a credential? So the committee at this point has offered a fairly broad definition of both of those. From a workforce perspective, when we think of the workforce, we're really looking very broadly at the people engaged in or available for work. And geographically, that can mean within a country or region, an industry, or a company. A credential is also intentionally broad. It's evidence of the mastery, competence, or achievement of a specific topic or skill. And that can include things like standard credentials or license that we think of, but also things like badging and micro-badging that are starting to really gain a lot of steam in the marketplace. So the division is working to refine these. This, I'm confident, will continue to be reviewed and updated. And also they are working to make sure that these activities are coordinated across other industry associations and industry groups, like some of those that I just mentioned earlier. The next slide talks more about the activities of the Security and Privacy Committee. So given the backdrop we just talked about, why the division has come about, I wanted to share a little bit about these two projects and explore with you for a moment why we started here. The first thing that we are working on is a survey of workforce skills, credentials, and test security. And that is really intended to better understand not just how test publishers view credentials and the security around those credentials, but also how examinees and credential users view the security and the quality of credentials that they're receiving. So we are conducting this survey globally to have that more global input and perspective from those three very important groups of stakeholders in the equation. And that is something the survey has been prepared, but we would absolutely love to have feedback and input on, how we can go about recruiting individuals to participate in that. The second thing then that we're working on, and we'll talk more about today, is the framework that enables individuals to evaluate the security and privacy of credential offerings. We are starting from the security perspective, and then we will move into the privacy side. We want to make certain that we are looking globally at how these credentials are being evaluated and how we can provide a security framework for those credentials. And the reason is that these credentials are becoming more and more important globally. And I'm going to walk through with you just a moment some of the changes that we're going to see over the next several decades that really highlight the need for credentialing and for being able to show that the skills attained through education or workplace experience is really becoming something that having a portable credential to reflect that is critical to not only the examinees and the employers, but really to our broader communities. So if you go to the next slide, one of the first aspects of credentialing that I think is important is how our workforce is currently being impacted. So the global workforce, not just in the U.S., but in many of the other developing countries or developed nations, is aging, and it's actually shrinking. So what we're seeing are that skilled older workers in these developed nations are actually aging out of the workforce. Here's just an example. In the U.S. alone, 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day. So that means 3.65 million individuals in the baby boomer generation are eligible to leave or are leaving the workforce annually. And the baby boomer generation is actually better educated than any prior generation. So that is really seeing a lot of impact, or having a lot of impact on our domestic workforce. And that trend is expected to continue through the next 10 to 15 years. But the U.S. is not alone. By mid-century, 1/3 of the population of Europe is expected to be over the age of 60. And in some countries, like Germany, Spain, Italy, Japan, they will actually have more older people in their population than younger people in their population. So what that means is that you have more well-educated and skilled individuals leaving the workforce, and even fewer people available to enter into it and to take over some of those jobs. And what studies have found is that as people age out of the workforce and that country's workforce shrinks, its economy does as well. So currently the OECD is predicting shortfalls in key professional and skilled jobs that are very likely to reduce economic growth and lower a nation's GDP. Right now, the OECD is predicting by 0.5 percentage point annually until at least 2025. So what we're seeing is the shrinking of a workforce for countries across the globe that's predicted to have a direct impact on the economic well-being of our communities and the quality of life for our citizens. So we've got this aging workforce. That means, if you look at the next slide, we're going to be relying more and more on younger generations for everything like taxation, economic growth, skilled jobs, including, of course, healthcare. So we are going to see that the working people in a community are going to need to support more dependents. And that means the younger generations will need to be educated and skilled to make sure that they are able to perform these jobs that are being vacated by other skilled workers. What we're finding today is that more than 35 million youth in these developed nations are neither employed nor in education or training. And in some countries like Greece and Spain, that's more than 1 in 4 young workers. Youth are twice as likely to be unemployed as older workers, which means we have a big gap of skilled workers in the workforce. And that too is going to have a huge impact on our workforce and on the need for portable credentials. Now, migration is beginning to impact this. Native populations, native-born populations are projected to slow or even shrink in some developed nations, but population growth is still projected to continue, including in the U.S., because of a growing wave of migration. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things that's projected is that net migration will be a major contributor to the population growth in high-income countries like the U.S. or Germany or the U.K. And the good news is that can really help rebalance our labor markets and supply some skilled workers to areas being vacated by aging workers, but only if these individuals are able to demonstrate through assessment and other means that they have portable skills that are able to be leveraged for these jobs. So it's critical that we ensure that we have training and portable credentialing opportunities if we're to leverage these shifts in the workforce. So taken all together, these shifts make it even more critical that for the well-being of individuals and their families, as well as our community's economic health, if you go to the next slide, that we have an understandable workforce skills credentialing framework that can be used across geographic and country boundaries, and that enable workers to be matched to jobs that meet their skill sets, and employees to be able to employers to be able to fill their shrinking labor pool with the appropriate talent. That is a big reason why we're seeing so much growth in this particular space. So the good news is, on the next slide, that from a workforce perspective, initiatives are underway, as I mentioned before, to enable the intelligent comparison of worker credentials. And establishing a credentialing framework that uses a common language and enables the opportunity for portable credentials to be used across country boundaries is a big part of what these initiatives are trying to do, so that it can make it easier for job seekers and recruiters to identify good skill and job matches. What I will say, however, is that at this point in time, most of these efforts focus on a common framework for defining and measuring skills and competencies at different levels. That's the equation being used today. So if you go to the next slide, really these efforts that are underway are really focusing on the competencies being measured, and that is absolutely critical. But what I would submit to you, if you go ahead and click the slide, is that defining and measuring skills is not sufficient to deliver the trustworthy portable credentials that are going to be needed to address some of these aging workforce and skills gaps that we're seeing. Our perspective is that there's a missing piece. And the reason is, if you go to the next slide, is because access to scholarships, to training, to education, and to job opportunities should be based on skills and knowledge that people can demonstrate, not on their ability to cheat or buy answers for or credentials for to obtain. So the more valuable that these credentials, these portable credentials become, the more fraud you are going to see in the market. And that, for those of us who've been in the testing industry for a while, that has absolutely held true. If you need just a really quick example, go online and Google how to cheat on a test, and you will get well over 42 million hits. I think we didn't update this slide for this presentation, so I guarantee you this is higher. 42 million hits for people looking for ways to cheat on a test. And that's just a really simple example, I think, for the potential for fraud in the testing industry and in the credentialing industry. But I do think it underscores the fact that the more valuable access to education and workforce skills and credentials become, the more fraud we're going to see in this space. And more specifically, we know that there are documented instances of people paying thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars for proxy test takers, for fake certificates and credentials, even up to tens of thousands of dollars for live test forms. So test fraud is absolutely big business. It's an organized business, and knowing the value of these portable workforce credentials and where that market is headed, I don't think we should expect anything less in this space. So our view is, no matter how sound test content is at measuring different skills and competencies, if people are able to buy a credential or cheat to obtain that credential, and we know people do, then from an individual level, it isn't a reliable credential, and certainly not from an employer's perspective. In fact, it's the opposite of everything we need good portable credentials to help us with in our global workforce and labor challenges. So that is why this particular effort has really focused on a framework beyond content. Because if people are going to rely on portable credentials for education or career opportunities, then we have to include a framework for ensuring that the security of the test and the testing experience and the credential itself is transparent to individuals, that they understand what it is that they're getting and know the level of reliability that they can place upon it. So that is more of a complete equation for trustworthy portable credentials. And that's why we've tried to move the conversation beyond a framework around content to include a framework around test security, and eventually expanding that into privacy for education, or excuse me, for portable credentials to be used in education and careers. So that has been the work that the group has put into this. That is why we feel pretty passionately about what we're doing and how it can actually really meaningfully impact test takers and credential users and employers, as well as our industry. And with that, we actually have another poll for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen. Jen, do you want to go ahead and go through the poll?
Thank you, Rachel. So our second poll, we're wondering which stakeholders in the workforce skills credentialing space value test security the most. So this is your personal perception, and your choices are test takers, test publishers, credential users, for example, employers, or unsure. And Rochelle will let us know what the results are.
Yeah, we'll give people a couple minutes to vote. About half of you have voted. Like some people are thinking it over. Okay, about 70% of you have voted. We'll give you about 3 more seconds. Okay, looks like the voting has slowed. I'll go ahead and share those results.
All right, very interesting. So strong responses for test publishers, and then not too far behind that for credential users. And then test takers, relatively low there at only 5% of you thinking that they value test security the most, and some unsures. In reality, we're not really sure from our perspectives either in this committee what the actual correct answer, if you will, is to this question. And that's part of the reason that we're doing the survey that Rachel had mentioned earlier. So we'll dive a little bit, if we go back to the slide deck, into the process that we went through in developing the framework. Typically in the testing industry, we really, as testing companies, think about our tests and our credentials from the inside out. And what we mean by that is that we're really thinking about our goals, the protection of our intellectual property, and what's important to us for test security. And then we communicate that to all the stakeholders in the real world. So in this case, we're talking about the employees and credential users or employers. That's all a very important process, and we definitely don't want to neglect protecting our interests as testing companies. But when we thought about appropriate test security for credentials, we really challenged ourselves to think first about the needs of the employees or the test takers and the employers, the credential users, and considering them first in determining appropriate levels of test security needed for credentials. So we started looking first at the examinee perspective and considered a couple of different items here in from this perspective, one of which is value. So we really believe that examinees want to know what exactly the credential says about their skills. Does it say that they're meeting a minimum ability level? Does it say that they're below average, maybe above average? And they also want to be sure that they have the opportunity to demonstrate their skill level during the credentialing process. And that leads to fairness. Examinees want to make sure that whatever the requirements were for them to obtain the credential, that everyone else who has that credential went through the same process with no special privileges provided to anyone. They also want that process to be fair, and part of that fairness is knowing that there are consequences if someone cheated. Then we took a look at things from the credential user's perspective. So again, typically we're talking about employers here. Credential users are interested in whether the individual actually earned the credential and that they truly have the skills that are indicated by possessing the credential. They also want to be able to authenticate the credential. If someone presents a certificate or another form of credential to them, they want to be able to verify that that credential is authentic. And they have an expectation that if the credential is revoked at some point, that they be notified of that revocation, whether it's test security related issues or for some other reason. We also believe that they'd be interested in knowing who actually administered the test that is part of the credential, what brand is attached to the credential, and who else in the market is relying on it. You know, a credential that's well known and respected in the market would likely carry more weight than a credential that's new or carries less prestige. And there may actually be an additional value to the credential user. If they have a credential that they're confident in, they can rely on, they're actually saving money, time, and effort if they don't have to administer their own test that can rely on scores or credentials that are already out there and valid in the marketplace. So we looked at these perspectives and then also took into case the life cycle of a credential. It really allowed us to develop a framework that will answer all of the questions that span the life cycle of the credential, and you see the list on screen there. We made sure that we looked at each of those individual categories and then built in actions that need to be taken by test publishers to address each of these 6 categories in a way that responds to concerns of the test takers, the credential users, and the test publishers. So it meets everyone's needs. Finally, we wanted to make sure that we included different levels of security. It's absolutely appropriate that different credentials have different levels of security baked into the credentialing process. Test security is not a one-size-fits-all capability. Depending on the value of a particular credential to the market and what the market is needing, it may be absolutely appropriate to have a test that is self-administered by the test taker at their home without any proctor involvement and no identification required. On the other hand, it may also be totally appropriate to have a requirement for testing to happen in a secure environment in a physical test center with a photo ID plus some sort of biometric identification and with the proctor overseeing the administration and enforcing all of the rules. So the framework and security levels are really intended to bring transparency to the global workforce market. They provide a framework that test publishers will use to self-identify the level of security within their assessment. So the framework isn't a set of standards. It's really intended to be a guiding global framework that can come alongside the efforts that are going on in Europe, India, and the US that Rachel mentioned earlier. And if this framework is used consistently, it will really offer more information and transparency to employees and to credential users as they're evaluating the different credentials that are out there in the market and determining what will fit their needs. So all of those considerations have really created the foundation for the test security framework, but we're not going to base the final work product on our own customer experience, and that's why we're conducting the surveys that Rachel mentioned earlier. We'll be talking to employees, to credential users, employers, to test publishers, to really help us refine the framework so that we're developing the final product that really reflects the needs of those three groups and helps to protect the validity of credential results. So in summary, our work to date, we have a draft framework that contains 6 categories of the life cycle of the credential, and there are 4 tiers that each also contain various capabilities and tools to protect security. So 6 different categories of the life cycle and 4 tiers within each of those 6 categories. And again, the intention of this framework is really to bring transparency in the credentialing space through self-identification by test publishers and credential issuers. All right, I will turn it over to Jamie, who's going to walk through some specific examples from the framework for us.
Thanks, Jen. What I thought I would do is, we really don't have the time to go through the whole framework, although it is something that we can send you a draft copy of after the webinar today. But I thought I would go through just kind of a couple of examples of how this framework might be used. So let's go to the next slide. And I have a couple of little scenarios to go through with you. The first one is JRJ Manufacturing, that stands for Jennifer Rachel Jamie Manufacturing Company. They need entry-level workers to operate a simple piece of machinery. And so what they're doing is that they're offering candidates a pre-employment reading test to assess their comprehension and their ability to follow directions. We need to know that the test is given online without any proctoring, and the score results are really used in conjunction with other factors to determine if the candidate is going to move to the next round of employment for interview. So let's go to the next slide. And what you're seeing here is 2 things. We're looking at one of the categories called test administration, and we're looking at this from a test taker perspective. So as Jen and Rachel talked about, there's the test taker, there's the publisher, there's credential user, so there's those different levels. And so we're going to look at this from a test taker perspective. And what we see here is that the individual says, okay, at a level 1, that they know that the credential that they are taking has value and that the results are going to be reliable if they follow the rules. They've been given the testing rules in advance, so they know what's expected of them. They're able to take the test on their own, and they may or may not be proctored during testing. So again, in our scenario, this is a very entry-level, low-level test. If we look at the other end of the spectrum, level 4, from a test administration perspective, also from a test taker's perspective, they know that their credential is valuable and that the test is fair because there are strong standardized test administration requirements that are in place. They know that they have to take a test at a designated secure location. They've been told the rules in advance, and they know what they need to follow. They're prohibited from bringing any unauthorized devices or aids, particularly electronic devices, into the testing room, and they expect that they will see some additional security measures that are going to prevent them or others from taking any, from doing any type of cheating or theft from the test. So let's go back one, sorry. So the thing to note here is that what do we need to think about from a test security perspective if we're creating a level 1 test versus a level 4 test? What will be those things that we need to think about and put in place depending on that level of test administration security that we want to have in place? Let's go to the next scenario. The new JRJ, handheld medical sonogram, just to know, so JRJ is a very diverse conglomerate with their hands in a lot of different areas. So JRJ has this new medical sonogram, and it's being marketed to the US and Europe, but a credential is required for its use. So individuals here taking this training for the sonogram device, they already have medical credentials. They're already either a doctor, a nurse, maybe a registered diagnostic medical sonographer. It is a computerized test. It's completed at the end of the training course, and the scores are recorded and tracked. So the manufacturer wants to make sure they know who has completed the training successfully. And lastly, the test is going to be monitored by the instructor who taught the course. So let's go to the next slide and look at, we're going to look at test taker identification at both level 1 and level 4. So at a minimum level, the examinee is going to self-identify. The credential issuer may seek to match that identification through tools such as Facebook or Twitter accounts, and also that credential user will seek identification if any type of questions arise. Now on level 4, so at the highest level of security for test taker identification, we're going to require some type of government-issued photo ID. The identification could further be established by biometric tools. Maybe there's challenges or a presentation of additional government-issued photo identification. And likely, we're going to capture the test taker's image at the time of testing. So again, just understanding that spectrum of, you know, what do we want to know about the test taker? How important is it for us to know about that test taker so that we can use the right level of the framework to make those decisions. So those were just a couple of examples that we wanted to go through. Okay, we can, you know what, we're going to skip this one. Tristan, go ahead and skip this. Some of the challenges that are involved with this framework is communicating framework. I mean, we have about 50 or so people that attended the training today. We spoke about this framework at the ATP conference in March, but we really want to get the word out and get people familiar with this framework and get them to comment on it. I think the other challenge that we have is getting credential users and examinees to request the use of these framework levels. So again, it's a communications piece, it's an awareness piece, and will the users of this framework really be able to see its flexibility? And as both Jen and Rachel talked about, these are really guidelines. These are not set in stone standards, but we want to provide some flexibility there in their use. And hopefully what we would like to have happen is that the framework is actually consulted before test development so that they can make decisions about the level of test that's going to be developed, you know, based on making decisions from the framework. Let's go to the next slide. So both Jen and Rachel talked about the fact that this is a work in progress. We hope to have the framework reviewed and commented on by ATP 2017 so that we can report on it. And the next thing that this group will be working on is actually a privacy framework that will be similar to this one, but looking at privacy issues. So let's go to the next one. Here's our call to action. We would love additional input on this framework. If you're willing to volunteer and comment and review this, we're going to be setting up a poll question that you can answer yes or no to, and that will enable us to push this framework for review out to those folks who said, yes, I would definitely love to participate. And as well, we'd love to have a wide range of input. So if you know of others, either in your organization or maybe even folks who are test users and test takers, we'd love to have that feedback as well. So here's our poll question. Would you be willing to serve as a reviewer of the draft of the Workforce Skills Credentialing Framework? And you can just answer yes or no.
half the people have answered. We'll give you a few more seconds to answer. And also, if you'd like to think about it, please do. When I send out the follow-up email to this webinar, I will also provide a link there if you've changed your mind or maybe had time to ask a colleague if they'd be interested. We'll provide you with a way to sign up from that as well. So no problem if you're not quite sure yet today. Okay, it looks like pretty much everyone has cast their answer, so I'll go ahead and close that. Do we need to, Jamie? I think we can just go ahead and move forward.
Okay. Yep, that sounds great.
Great. Okay.
So to summarize, we're really looking to try to create a complete equation, as Rachel talked about the workforce skills in this country and abroad. We know that there is a shrinking skills workforce, and it really is important for us to not only know that the content that is being delivered is the correct content to assess skills, but we need to include that test security piece so that we can have trustworthy, portable credentials. I could say that I'm not a psychometrician, but I even understand this basic equation. So I really invite you to help us in developing this global framework for security of these testing, of these credentials. And not only the test, but the testing experience and the credential itself and how those credentials are used. With that, we'll move to the next slide and open it up for any questions that we might have from the audience.
Yeah, so please go ahead and enter your questions in the question box if you have one for our panel today. I'll go ahead and start with a couple that have come in during the session. First of all, we understand these tiers are being proposed right now. Are these considered standards or guidelines?
So I'll go ahead and answer that one. So as we mentioned, these are guidelines, and they're not standards. It may be in the future that they become standards. It's something that we could look to ANSI to try to get approved. But right now, we'd like to see them used by organizations to help make decisions about the level of tests that they want to create and administer. Rachel or Jennifer, do you want to add to that?
This is Rachel. Sure. I would just add that it is absolutely correct to say at this point these are guidelines. These are opportunities to provide more transparency to our credential users and those who take our tests. And I would say that this is a rapidly changing aspect of the industry, that we are really seeing a lot of growth and a lot of attention, not only by test publishers, but also by government entities. So the European Commission, there's a lot of interest here and money domestically that is going to fund some of this. So there are a lot of interested parties trying to understand really what does a credential mean, and how can that really be used to help communities and states and countries really improve their workforce and make sure that people are able to demonstrate through portable credentials their ability to meet an employer's needs. So I do anticipate that as the market continues to mature, we're going to see more of this be included in that. So while it's just a guideline now, I do think we're probably going to see, as the market continues to mature, more requirements around the test security space.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Rachel and Jamie. Another question came in. How will we be notified that the framework is available for review?
Rachel, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So the framework itself, as we've noted, we are getting a lot of external input into the framework. And before it is finalized and published, it will go through final leadership and legal review through ATP. So once that is completed, then it will be available on the ATP website. So that will be one mechanism through which you can obtain the tiers. It will also be information that we are looking to really incorporate into the other initiatives that are going on. So, for example, the Connecting Credentials initiative here in the U.S. or some of the EC work in Europe, so that the principles and the the different levels are considered as part of the competency framework as well. So for sure through ATP, and then probably through some of those other initiatives, you will hopefully start to see the influence of those tiers there as well.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So this is kind of along the same line. Someone wonders where and how this will be published. So will there be like a document released to ATP, or do you know kind of more information about the specifics yet?
So that is a great question, and one that we would really love to have input on. I think you will see both a paper as well as maybe more of a summary table that will help guide people in the application of the various tiers and the requirements of those tiers, or the guidelines created within them. So I think you will see probably both as a final work product that will be available to people. And again, if you're a member of ATP, it will be on the website. And potentially, I know in the past we've had some where they would be available for purchase as well. So that will probably also be the case here.
Okay, that's great. And also for those of you that subscribe to our Cheating in the News newsletter from Caveon, we'll certainly keep you posted as well about this important publication when it becomes available. We'll make sure we have it in our monthly newsletter and send out messaging that way, so you'll be able to find it that way as well. So that's all the questions I have. Jamie, would you like to finish up? And
yeah, I wanted to thank our presenters today, Rachel and Jennifer, for joining us to talk about this important work that's going on, and again invite folks who are on the webinar to participate through review of the framework, and those comments and suggestions can only make it stronger. So thank you again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in July for our next webinar, which will be July 15th. Thank you so much.